I'm Venetia Rainey.
And I'm Roland Oliphant.
And this is Iran, the latest. It's Monday, 13th of July, 2026.
It's day 22 of the 60-day deadline to reach a peace deal between the US and Iran. But instead of talks, last week has seen fighting almost every day. This weekend was the most violent in the Middle East since the ceasefire was declared. We're going to be breaking down exactly what happened and why it is happening.
We're going to be looking at a deadly Iranian attack on a ship in the Strait of Hormuz and the suggestion that the US have used sea attack drones for the first time. Plus, Keir Starmer is reported to be about to proscribe the IRGC as a terror group. Well, Roland, it's been a very busy weekend. If anyone thought things would let up after last week's kinetic activity, as we like to call it, bombs flying basically, it really hasn't. Should we run through a bit of a TikTok of what's happened to catch people up?
Sure. So beginning on Saturday, we may as well, because that's,
first day of the weekend traditionally.
First day of the weekend traditionally. Iran attacked a Cypriot-flagged container ship called the GFS Galaxy. This was late in the evening of Saturday the 11th. It was attacked while transiting eastbound through the Strait of Hormuz along the southern Omani corridor, the one advocated by the United States, after departing Dubai. It had its AIS switched off at the time. US Central Command said a fire broke out on board, caused severe damage to the engine room, and left the vessel unable to continue its voyage. And this is quite significant because previously we've seen ships getting hit, being slightly damaged, but for a ship to be so badly damaged by an Iranian drone so as not to continue its voyage. I'm not sure we've seen that before. And the crew had to abandon ship in a lifeboat, or they did abandon ship afterwards in a lifeboat. 11 Indian crew members, 10 rescued, 1 still missing as of today. India has condemned the attack. Yet again, it's their citizens caught in the middle of this, as we've seen throughout the war. And there are so far 11 Indians incidentally who've been killed since February 28th. Tehran doesn't deny that it's done it, said the GFS Galaxy had taken its unauthorised route, and so on. And so on Sunday, the IRGC said they hit a second vessel.
Yeah, they accused it of more violating regulations, and a short time later, US Central Command said its forces had carried out another round of strikes against Iran. So this is the first set that we'll see over the weekend. They said they hit approximately 140 Iranian military targets with precision munitions launched by land and sea-based fighter aircraft, drones and naval vessels. Targets included Iranian missile and drone sites, naval capabilities, ammunition storage facilities, communication networks, and coastal surveillance locations. This is a far heavier set of attacks than the 2 previous rounds of strikes that we were reporting on last week. And there's just a sense, I don't know, I might be wrong, but it feels like a sense that this is starting to get a bit personal. We've now had 2 statements from CENTCOM where they explicitly say that they're doing things at the direction of their commander-in-chief, i.e. President Donald Trump. I would assume anything they do has been signed off by Donald Trump, but for them to mention it, that is new. We didn't have that over the last few weeks. When Donald Trump was talking to NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday, he said, "We bombed the hell out of them last night. They're very evil and sick people. We had meetings with them." He's referring to some meetings in Oman on Saturday, which we'll get onto later. But it's sort of a continuation of that theme that we were seeing in NATO last week, where Trump seemed just really disgusted by it all, just really fed up and furious. So I think that's quite interesting.
So that takes it to, apparently, over 3 nights of strikes.
Yeah.
Sunday, Saturday, Friday. CENTCOM says it's hit more than 300 targets at the direction of the Commander-in-Chief. As you say, to degrade Iran's ability to attack civilian mariners and commercial vessels freely transiting the Strait. That's their phraseology. Their Iranian state media reported yesterday, Sunday, that a telecommunications company employee had been killed and 2 others injured on attacks in the southern province of Hormuz, which is on the Gulf Coast. And then Iran retaliated. It's launched missiles and drones at several of its at least 5 of its neighbours, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar and Jordan.
And that's again up from 4, which we saw on, I think, Friday, which was up from 2, which we'd seen earlier in the week. So things are escalating. These strikes are getting wider and wider. I think the US started by striking 80 targets, and it was 90, now 120. So, yeah, Iran bombs its neighbours across the Gulf, and Oman, I think, is quite significant because they have been working as a sort of interlocutor between the US and Iran. So, yesterday evening, Sunday evening, US bombs Iran again, strikes Iranian military air defence systems, coastal radar sites, missile and drone capabilities, small boats, and it uses fighter aircraft, naval vessels, one-way attack aerial drones, and for the first time, one-way attack sea drones. Now, we don't have more details on exactly what sea drones they used, but our listeners might remember that they used a sea drone earlier or late last month to rescue some people who'd been downed from a helicopter somewhere in the Gulf of Oman. And that was a Corsair USV manufactured by Saronic, and it was part of Task Force 59, which is the US Navy's unmanned systems unit, their sort of hub for drones and AI stuff in the Navy. So quite possibly one of those, but we'll watch for further details.
We've spoken about American one-way attack sea drones in the past, but we don't know what model this is. And I happen to know that a request was made in the newsroom for a piece about this, and just so far there isn't really enough material to available to produce that. We don't even know what they did with it.
Yeah.
It just says we used it in this operation. So more interesting things to come out of that. So the Iranians, I say the Iranians specifically, I mean Fars news agency, said the areas in Abadan and the Shagadan districts of Khuzestan in western Iran were hit by US strikes. They also reported a power outage in Ahvaz, the provincial capital, according to Al Arabiya. And one person killed, 4 wounded in the US strike on a water pumping station in southwestern Iran. Again, that's all from Iranian state media. And, you know, so this takes us to kind of last night, Sunday evening.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear from the public rhetoric that accompanied this that, I don't know, I mean, is the MOU still in existence or not?
I mean, it's a really good question.
Mohammad Bagher Kalabaf, Speaker of Iran's parliament, main negotiator, everyone's quite familiar with who he is now. The era of one-side deals is over, in capital letters. We told you, keep your word or pay the price. Reality is knocking.
Sounds a bit like Trump there, doesn't he?
Yeah, a little bit of mirroring.
The rhetoric is starting to sound quite similar.
Definitely in the kind of syntax of their social media kind of ex-posts. Yeah. Definitely a kind of mirroring there. Ismail Baghai, the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman, said on Sunday that Iran's strikes on US bases in the region were a legitimate and lawful exercise of its inherent right to self-defense under international law. He's been speaking again today. He said that as far as we're concerned, the MOU is over as long as the Americans don't abide by it. You see what I mean? And he kind of he said, we've always made clear that we'll walk away from deals if the other party don't abide by it. Whether or not that actually is a rejection of the MOU, we're 22 days in? We're about halfway to the deadline for a full peace deal.
A third.
A third?
60 days.
That's okay, a third, yeah. A third of the way.
I mean, that's kind of what Trump was saying last week, though, right? The ceasefire's over, we can keep talking. You know, he's sort of saying, I'll walk away as well. This isn't working for me.
He said, Donald Trump said last week, when he relaunched strikes, that he insisted, he said that the MOU to him was more or less over, but that didn't mean the war was back on. Resisted that, said, no, it doesn't mean it's war. So in this kind of rhetorical space where no one wants to call the exchange of precision munitions and high explosives a war.
Reminds me a bit of Russia refusing to call what they're doing in Ukraine a war. They call it a special military operation, and we're hearing similar language coming out of the Americans too. You know, this is a war. This is a war. The Gulf allies are being bombed. Strait of Hormuz is closed back up again. People are dying in Iran. Bombs are flying. How is that not a war?
An interesting semantic and philosophical question. I don't know. I'm sure there are views on that.
Yes, I'm sure.
Maybe we'll get some to talk about that. When is a war not a war? The philosophy of war. What is the sound of one hand clapping, and so on. Anyway, so there's conflict. Conflict is happening.
Yeah.
There have been talks at the same time. These talks were taking place.
Yeah.
In Oman again. What do we know about that, Venetia?
So this was between Iranian foreign ministry officials and Omani foreign ministry officials, and they were trying to find a way to manage the Strait of Hormuz issue. And the US is sort of in the background of this, not technically present, but certainly involved. Iran said those talks failed. They accused the US of preventing an agreement by pressuring Oman. On Sunday, we heard Trump saying that Iran had agreed to a deal with the US, a nuclear deal. Iran's foreign ministry have denied that today. They're saying no topic other than the Strait of Hormuz was discussed during the meeting in Oman. Nothing's come out of it, clearly. I mean, fighting is still ongoing, and there's no sense that the Omanis will be able to freely use the route that hugs their coastline, that is in their territorial waters. I mean, we should be clear about what's happening here. Iran is attacking boats that are using a route that is in Omani territorial waters. I don't see why Oman shouldn't be able to allow that, and why that's in Iran's power to be able to stop it, but that is exactly what's happening here.
Yeah, apparently Oman said, let's reopen both shipping lanes.
Yes.
Have all the shipping lanes.
Could we? Just all of them.
Everyone can have a shipping lane. The bottom line, of course, being here that I suppose the Iranians saw their grip on Hormuz being eroded and decided to push back on that because they see that as a crucial bargaining tool.
Yeah. Also, just worth mentioning that Axios have a detail which it's hard to know. There's a lot of misinformation flying around, but they have a detail that suggests that the Iranian delegation in Oman on Saturday couldn't get approval immediately to this suggestion by Oman that they open all the shipping routes, that they had to take it back to Tehran for further internal discussions. That obviously hints at rifts. There's been a lot of suggestion, and we had reporting on this last week, that the Iranians had back-channeled to Washington to say that it was a rogue unit in the IRGC Navy that had been attacking ships and that they wanted to get diplomatic talks back on track. As far as I can see from the public messaging, they seem pretty united about wanting to keep hold of the Strait of Hormuz. So it's hard to see how credible that could be. As I say, there's a lot of misinformation going around. Maybe it's that, maybe that is really true, and it's hard to know. I'll just put all that out there. There are suggestions that there are rifts. We don't know if that's actually true. Yes. But yes, that gets us to Monday.
So Monday, the IRGC says that in response to Sunday strikes from the United States, it attacked several bases linked to the US in Bahrain, Kuwait and Jordan. Iranian state media says that the IRGC struck 2 US-linked air bases in Kuwait, as well as army infrastructure and a joint command centre in Bahrain, and the Prince Hassan air base in Jordan. Bahrain's Interior Ministry issued several warnings over the last 4 hours, whenever we wrote this down, probably about an hour ago. So on Monday morning, urging citizens to head to safe locations. Jordanian military says it shot down 4 Iranian missiles entering its airspace. Kuwaiti military says it intercepted what it called hostile aerial targets inside Kuwaiti airspace. The IRGC also said it attacked radar systems in Oman as part of its strikes against the US, again reported via Iranian state media. There have been reports, according to Mehr news agency in Iran, of fresh explosions in Bandar Abbas and around Qasem Island. No further developments about what caused those blasts.
Yeah.
But therefore, safe to say that it is currently an active combat zone.
Yeah. And that means that the Strait of Hormuz has almost completely closed up. So we had over the weekend the Iranians repeatedly saying transit through the waterway is not possible. The Americans kept insisting it is open. Trump specifically said it's open. But crucially, no commercial vessels have crossed the Strait of Hormuz while broadcasting their location since yesterday evening. That's according to marine traffic, which tracks these sort of things. Some of them might be switching their AIS transponders off. We don't know. Then you only pick them up once they get out of the Strait of Hormuz or once they get back in, depending which way they're going up. It was already drying up. I think we had 14 going through on Friday, 21 on Saturday. And
Strait of Hormuz was drying up.
It was drying up.
So you could walk from Oman to Iran.
That'd be useful, wouldn't it? Or not useful, depending on which side you're on. Traffic, marine traffic was drying up.
Oh.
Crossings, transits were drying up. 21 on Saturday, 8 on Sunday, and then, as I say, none since yesterday evening. We'll see if any get across today. You know, if the Strait of Hormuz doesn't open up to shipping, then the MOU, I think, has achieved absolutely nothing. That was the main thing it was supposed to achieve. That was the only thing it had achieved over the past few weeks. If that disappears, what are we doing?
Well, it's on life support, isn't it? I think is the way to describe it. But then the question then, of course, is what replaces it? Short of that. Yes, I mean, you were making the point that, you know, when is a war not a war? And so on. I suppose this particular spate of conflict, this round of conflict, is both qualitatively and quantitatively different.
Okay.
In the sense that the scale, the tempo of operations is much lower than it was during the full-scale war. So you're not seeing kind of dozens and dozens of strikes across Iran enabled by AI with just targets all over the place. Secondly, Israel is not involved currently in this escalation.
Yeah.
This is strictly a US, as far as we know, this is strictly a US-Iranian exchange of fire at the moment. So significantly different to the main phase of the war.
Do you think the Americans are trying to sort of keep that delineation point? Like if the Israelis get back involved, then we are kind of just back in the war. Whereas so long as it's just us doing this tit-for-tat stuff over the shipping, it's something else.
I've no idea.
Well, you're going to be speaking to someone who's ex-Mossad tomorrow.
I'm speaking to Seema Shahin, formerly of Mossad's analysis unit, I think.
Bureau or something.
Yeah. Tomorrow. So we will be asking her about what she thinks of that. Exactly.
I saw something interesting, that there's a suggestion that President Masoud Pezeshkian is increasingly becoming a scapegoat for the failures of this MOU. And then also some suggestion in America that J.D. Vance has been very much put forward as the face of this peace deal, because, you know, he's the one who was against this war and he thinks that there is a deal to be made. Quite interesting that sort of politics in Iran and US might be looking for people to blame, because it is going south and quite fast.
I mean, this has been, those are two themes we've seen in both countries since the beginning of the war. Certainly, you know, Pezeshkian being set up from the very beginning, explicitly in a statement from the Supreme Leader, who we still haven't seen, saying that, you know, this was the President's idea. This MOU was the President's idea, and we saw at the time. That was going even further than his father went in kind of washing his hands of responsibility for this all going wrong. So that was pinned on Pezeshkian. And yes, you're absolutely right. As far as J.D. Vance is concerned, it's been a narrative throughout this war, hasn't it? He's kind of owned the skepticism in the peace deals, whereas I suppose Marco Rubio's been seen to own the wariness of it, if you see what I mean.
Or Pete Hegseth. Marco Rubio's managed to sort of stay slightly afloat of it all.
Afloat of it?
On the Strait of Hormuz, in a boat.
Afloat of the drying up Strait of Hormuz. Marco Rubio, adrift.
He's slightly detached. He seems to be both in favour of the war and in favour of a peace deal. I wouldn't pin the war on him, but I wouldn't pin the peace talks on him either. No,
yet. But you could, in terms of the public messaging, I think there's definitely been a sense in which J.D. Vance has been associated with the talks, and he kind of disappeared during the initial kinetic phase of the war, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I think those are reasonable observations to make. A couple of updates from inside Iran. A few more arrests of prominent people. Reza Khandan, the husband of the prominent human rights leader Nasrin Sotoudeh, was arrested by Iranian security forces on Friday. This is Iran Wire reporting this. His daughter Mirava Khandan confirmed the detention in an Instagram post saying her father was taken from their home. Reports suggest the arrest is intended to enforce a 6-year prison sentence originally issued in January 2019. Khandan was sentenced alongside Farhad Maisami, a doctor and civil activist, though the implementation of the sentence has previously been delayed. He was convicted on 2 charges, 5 years in prison for assembly and collusion against national security, and an additional 1-year term for propaganda activities against the Islamic Republic. And alongside that, in Britain, quite a significant development today in terms of legislation here.
Yes, people have been pushing for the IRGC, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to be proscribed, as in considered a terror group, for a really long time. And the suggestion has always been that we need to not do that so that there can be diplomatic back-channeling. And also some suggestion that the Americans wanted us to keep it that way so that they could use Britain to talk to the Iranians. Well, anyway, that has now been thrown out the window. We're hearing Keir Starmer, I assume, in sort of spate of activity in his last week, 2 weeks?
Last week.
It's last week, right. He wants to get a lot of stuff done. And one of the things he's going to get done is he's prescribing involving the IRGC. It's among 3 groups that he's going to be fast-tracking through Parliament, and they're going to be labelled a terrorist organisation. That was just breaking as we came in, so we can give more details on that tomorrow. But it's quite significant. It's definitely a boon for people who've been on the right, who've been pushing for this for a really long time, just asking why on earth are we not prescribing this group that spies on us, that creates misinformation, that is at war with the West.
Yeah, I think that they had to change the law to do this because they are a state-backed, or they are part of a state. And apparently the law previously didn't really allow you to label those as terrorist organisations. And I'm sure we don't have time to get into this debate now. There's always been a debate about whether it makes much sense. This puts the UK in line with the United States, Canada, the European Union. But I was speaking to somebody who worked for a very long time on Iran policy in the British kind of Whitehall machine, and not someone who I would say is soft on Iran, but someone who said the reason we didn't do it is because prescription was not the right tool. It didn't do what we wanted to do to combat these people. A debate to be had, probably not time to dive into that right now. Venetia, I think that brings us more or less up to date with the events over the weekend and this morning. I'm afraid I'm going to have to abandon you now. I need to rush back to my desk and do important newsroomy
I'll do some more
journalist
nattering
things.
about what's been going on in Jordan.
Excellent.
Yeah. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Well, that was me chatting to my co-host Roland Oliphant. Now we're going to bring in our guest. Dr. Andreas Krieg is a senior lecturer at the School of Security Studies at King's College London and a fellow at the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies. Andreas, welcome to Around the Latest. We've seen lots of damage done to American military bases across the Middle East over the course of this war, but fighting has really picked up over the past week, and I'm curious what you can tell us about the damage that's been done to these US bases during these recent bouts of fighting.
Well, very little has actually been verified. The problem is we're in this massive war over narratives, but both the Iranians and the Americans are trying to, overload the information environment with claims and counterclaims. It's very difficult to really verify what actually has been hit. I think the best thing we can do is look at satellite imagery, and what we see there suggests that some high-value targets have actually been hit, physical targets. We don't know how many movable targets such as planes and drones on the tarmac were destroyed or HIMARS systems were destroyed. But what is clear is that the Iranians are hitting targets, getting through air defenses, and reaching what they want to reach and then potentially destroyed. And that's particularly true for hangars and physical infrastructure, radars, air defense systems from Oman all the way up to Jordan. So it's on a very wide spectrum if you look at it geographically. And I think it's part of a wider campaign by the Iranians to degrade the US military capabilities in the region, from logistics to intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, as in radar systems, and also physical infrastructure, everything that kind of supports the US war effort against Iran. And they've been very, very targeted, very strategic about it. And, what we see is the Jordanians are claiming that they've intercepted a lot of projectiles that have come in. We've had the same claims made from the Kuwaitis and the Qataris, and we clearly have imagery of debris falling from the sky, which suggests projectiles were actually shot down. But equally, if they shoot 10 projectiles at Jordan, as they've done last night, I believe, and 2 of them get through, then this obviously does cause damage nonetheless.
And in terms of the definite physical damage that we can see on satellite pictures, can you provide a few more details about what we've seen over the past week, if you've seen any satellite pictures from that? Yeah,
so we've seen hangars being hit in various bases. We've seen radar sites hit, and if not destroyed, then incapacitated, which is equally bad. We've seen hit on tarmacs and plumes of smoke coming up, which suggests that potentially aircraft were hit as well, or drones, as the Iranians are claiming. CENTCOM so far has either not commented or denied some of the claims, but we know that in April, for example, CENTCOM, the US Central Command, has at times denied damage that was done, and then later on, a couple of months later, we've had the imagery to confirm actually that damage was done, and the damage that the US CENTCOM admitted to was far less than what actually was destroyed in the end. So we have to take both sides with a pinch of salt. But yeah, we're still in unless you actually have physical identification independently, it's very difficult to do this from afar.
And I know there's a lot of media reporting restrictions, particularly in the Gulf, around damage being caused or anything going on the ground. So yeah, as you say, we're in a bit of an information black space at the moment. How are these missiles getting through? What is something going wrong with the defence systems in these countries, or is it just a case, as you say, of the Iranians firing so many that some inevitably will get through?
There is no 360-degree impenetrable dome. I mean, the idea that there is, the Israelis call it the Iron Dome, that there is a dome that actually can defend against all incoming munitions and projectiles is an illusion. It doesn't exist. So you have to make a judgment call in the end of the day of judging whether a projectile could cause or does cause damage, and whether you should intercept it and where to intercept it. Are you trying to intercept it over the sea? Are you intercepting it over barren land? Where's the debris going to fall? Also, we're not just using ground-based air defense systems. There's a lot of air-to-air missiles being used as well by the air forces trying to intercept projectiles, especially drones, as they're coming in. And the drones are slow moving, and we have a relatively high across the Gulf and also Jordan, a very high rate of shooting them down. The problem is when the Iranians are firing a combination of drones and tactical ballistic missiles that come at a much faster pace, and then we've had also some ballistic missiles hitting Jordan that come on a trajectory which first go very much up into space and then come down, which gives you far less time to actually intercept as they're coming in. And if they then use the two combined of having drones, and sometimes in Kuwait, for example, you have FPV drones which are on a wire, you have sort of horizontally flying drones like the Shahid, and then at the same time also tactical ballistic missiles coming in, all at the same time, that can overwhelm a system. And that's exactly what they've been trying to do. But I would also caution, I mean, if you look at April, at the rate that Iran was firing in April at Israel and combined Gulf countries, and comparing that to now, the rate has gone down. So either their stockpile is depleting, or they're trying to prepare themselves for a long game where all they need to do is really fire a few, and one of them coming through. And if you look at the Strait of Hormuz, for example, and what they've been firing there, all you need is actually just the threat of firing, and a single drone coming in, and even being intercepted will put the markets on alert and will undermine freedom of navigation. So you don't need to do much in terms of having the effect that the Iranians are trying to generate.
Are you surprised at all? I mean, we knew that the Iranians still had lots of drones and that it's very hard to take out drone manufacturing capabilities. They can be hidden away very easily. But missile production capabilities were supposed to, the Americans claim, have been severely degraded. And I see you raising your eyebrows there slightly for our audio-only listeners. Are you surprised at all by the fact that they are still able to fire missiles at, as you say, some targets quite far away, Jordan, Oman?
No, I'm not surprised, because the intelligence that was put out initially in April, I think in early April, the Israelis and the Americans were making the claim that I think 70% of the missile production capability has been destroyed. The issue is they have destroyed the entrances. You have to think about the entire production system as being underground. They're not just dug in a few meters underground. They're deep inside mountains, impenetrable. So all you can do really is trying to destroy the entrances to these tunnel systems, which is what the Israelis and the Americans have achieved. But that leaves the tunnels themselves intact, and that's where most of their sites are, and that's where they still store a lot of missiles. And what we've seen is they've been able to dig out some of these destroyed entrances to the tunnels, and so they're now again operational. We also shouldn't underestimate the support that Iran has received from Russia and from China in terms of component parts to help them rebuild that missile system, and particularly keep the production going as they're firing. Because for the Chinese in particular, this is the front line of a kind of great power competition between East and West, and Iran is very much on the front line of fighting the war against America. And ultimately for the Chinese, it's keeping the Americans busy and distracted from far more important sort of areas such as the Indo-Pacific. And so taking all of this together, I mean, it was very clear that Iran was able to, first of all, still has an amazing stockpile that they can draw from, and also are still able to produce. And so, that like I said, they've fired less over the last couple of it's now more than a week when compared to April. But it might be that the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, is preparing for a long game war that could last for, we're in this state of between war and peace that could last for months. And so you need to retain the capability to keep on striking, because ultimately on the other side, on the Gulf side, on the US side, on the Israeli side, there's been a massive depletion of tactical ordnance that could be used and can be used by air power. And so this is also a game of it's a game of asymmetry, where the Iranians can produce faster, cheaper than the United States. So ultimately that will also be part of the consideration on the US side.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, what that does to the interceptor stocks. We already had reports that they were dwindling, and that some sales to European allies have been put on hold. This war wasn't supposed to keep going in this state between war and peace, as you say, although it feels a lot like a war to me. That must be really bad for American interceptor stocks and for all of their Gulf and Middle Eastern allies.
It's bad for the entire US-centric defense system. So it's bad for NATO. It's bad for allies in East Asia, like in Korea, because what the Americans have basically done, they've been drawing down their own sort of stockpiles and then pulling in from allies across the world. And so it consumes so much bandwidth and so much physical capability that ultimately, we're in a bit of a pickle should we have another front opening up, such as in Taiwan, or we've seen an intensification of Russian NATO competition or war on another flank other than Ukraine. So that is a problem, and the issue is defense industry is unable to really build more or build as quickly as we're using that ordnance at the moment. So that is highly problematic. But what we see now is particularly the Raytheon build air defense system, the Patriot system, the Patriot anti-air missiles, which are extremely expensive. Very few are being built per year. They're not being used massively. They're only being used against ballistic missiles. And we've seen, for the most part, in the early days, mostly we've seen the use of drones, and drones are being intercepted using different systems, including air-to-air defense missiles that are cheaper and are launched from aircraft. And they've been fairly consistent, actually.
I just want to return finally to these American bases in the Middle East. Quite a lot of damage caused. I saw satellite pictures from Jordan suggesting that the runway and the airbase had been badly damaged. When do these bases start to be effectively put out of action?
I think we're getting there, unfortunately. If you look, there's been a major report, I think it was in New York Times a month ago, that really listed meticulously all the different impacts by drones and by missiles across the GCC, across the Gulf, but also Jordan. And it's kind of a grim picture. If you look at Al Udeid, it's a massive base. It's the most important base for the US in the region. It's big. It is still operational, although the countries have not given the Americans a green light to use the bases. And that's true for most of the bases in the Gulf. They've rarely, if at all, been used. They've been used for refueling at times. Kuwait
being a notable exception, right? We've seen stuff, I think, being launched from there over the weekend.
Yeah, so Kuwait and Bahrain are the exception. So they've used their own tactical ballistic missile systems or US tactical ballistic missiles from their soil in retaliation to Iranian aggression. And we've seen Saudi and Emirati operations as well in April against Iranian targets. But except for that, they've been very clear, the Gulf states, that they don't want to become part of this war. And so we've seen exceptions being made now. But ultimately, the Americans are not drawing on these bases. They're drawing on Israel. They've been drawing on bases in Jordan, and they're now being hit. That is going to have an impact. And then obviously they're launching from aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Oman, which is still some of their main sort of backbone of their operations, which also puts into question the utility of having these bases in the Gulf. If ultimately they cannot use them. It's not just that they're being rendered dysfunctional. The bigger problem is really the radar system and the entire intelligence infrastructure, which means that the Americans are increasingly left in the dark. They don't have the sort of early warning systems in place that they might have had in place in February and March. And so that will make operations more difficult. And it's not like, we always try to portray the IRGC as some sort of, non-state actor type militia, which they are, but they are far more sophisticated, and they have been able to score some strategic and operational hits that work in Iran's favour.
That was Dr. Andreas Krieg from King's College London. That's all for today's episode of Iran the Latest. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.